We're taking our rightful share of your dad's inheritance. Get out of the house. My stepmother Diane's voice crackled through the phone, dripping with spite. I felt my heart race, but kept my voice steady. Talk to my lawyer, I replied, then ended the call. My name is Sophie Palmer, and I'm a 34-year-old financial consultant in Chicago. My father passed away 3 weeks ago after a battle with cancer, leaving behind a complex web of relationships and his considerable estate. My stepmother Diane, whom he married 5 years ago, had always resented my close relationship with him. She spent years trying to drive a wedge between us, but my father saw through her manipulations. What Diane didn't know was that my father had prepared for this exact scenario. In the months before his death, as his illness progressed, we had lengthy discussions about his estate. He witnessed how Diane's behavior grew increasingly controlling and hostile. She would try to prevent him from seeing me, claiming he needed rest, and would intercept my calls. But my father was no fool. "Sophie," he had said during one of our private meetings at his office, "I've seen how Diane treats you. I know what she's capable of, and I won't let her take what's rightfully yours." He had already begun working with his lawyer to ensure his assets would be protected and properly distributed according to his wishes. The family home where I grew up, and where all my childhood memories lived, was legally secured in my name months ago. The majority of his estate was carefully designated to me through ironclad trusts and legal documentation that left no room for manipulation. My father, ever the meticulous planner, had even recorded video testimonials explaining his decisions, anticipating that Diane might try to contest the will. Now, as I sat in my apartment looking at the phone, I couldn't help but smile at Diane's premature victory call. She had no idea that her attempt to bully me out of my inheritance was about to backfire spectacularly. My father's lawyer would be contacting her first thing in the morning with some very unwelcome news. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people's own actions lead to their downfall. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to review the estate documents one more time. The next few days would be interesting, to say the least. I grew up watching my father build his real estate business from the ground up. After my mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, it was just the two of us for many years. We developed a special bond. He taught me everything he knew about business and finance, which eventually led to my career choice. Despite his busy schedule, he never missed my school events or forgot to help me with homework. Those years shaped who I am today. Everything changed when Diane entered our lives. She worked as a receptionist at one of my father's properties, and within 6 months of meeting him, they were married. I was 29 at the time, living my own life, but I noticed how quickly she tried to take control. At first, it was subtle, suggesting my father was too tired for our weekly dinners, or claiming he was too busy to take my calls. But over time, her true colors showed. Diane was 15 years younger than my father, and her spending habits were outrageous. She redecorated the entire house, erasing all traces of my mother's touch. She convinced my father to buy her expensive cars and designer clothes, claiming she needed to look the part as his wife. I watched with growing concern as she isolated him from old friends and business associates, always finding fault with anyone who didn't agree with her. My father started to see through her act about 2 years ago when his health began declining. He confided in me that he'd caught her going through his financial documents late at night and noticed her asking peculiar questions about his will and business holdings. That's when he started taking precautions. "I married her because I was lonely," he admitted to me during one of his chemotherapy sessions. "But I won't let my mistake hurt you, Sophie. You're my daughter, my legacy. Everything I built was meant for you." We spent his final months getting his affairs in order, making sure every detail was legally sound. He even recorded videos explaining his decisions, knowing Diane would try to paint me as a manipulative daughter taking advantage of a sick man. My father was always 3 steps ahead, even at the end. The weight of his trust in me, and his determination to protect me from Diane's greed, only strengthened my resolve to honor his wishes and stand my ground. As I looked through old family photos in my apartment that evening, I knew the real battle was just beginning, but I was ready. The morning after Diane's threatening call, I met with Richard, my father's longtime lawyer and friend, at his office. His face was grim but determined as he shared the latest developments. "Sophie, Diane's lawyer contacted me last night. They're planning to contest the will, claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes," Richard explained, shuffling through a stack of papers. "But what they don't know is that we have everything on video." My father had insisted on recording every meeting where he discussed his estate plans, clearly stating his reasons and demonstrating his mental clarity. He'd even had his doctors document his cognitive state during these decisions. It was as if he knew exactly what Diane would try to do. "They're demanding an emergency hearing," Richard continued. "Diane's claiming she needs immediate access to the accounts for household maintenance. She doesn't realize all the utilities and bills have already been transferred to your name." I felt a surge of anger thinking about how Diane had treated my father in his final months, restricting his visitors, monitoring his phone calls, always hovering when I visited. But my father had outmaneuvered her, and now it was time to let his planning pay off. "When's the hearing?" I asked, already knowing this would be the turning point. "Tomorrow morning. They're pushing for speed, which will actually work in our favor. They haven't had time to fabricate any evidence, and we have everything documented." Richard smiled slightly. "Your father was brilliant, Sophie. He knew exactly what he was doing." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father's last days and how Diane had tried to control every aspect of his life. She'd even attempted to prevent me from seeing him in the hospital, claiming he needed rest. Little did she know that during those precious final moments, he and I had already set everything in motion. I pulled out the last birthday card he gave me, reading his message again. "Sometimes, Sophie, the best revenge is letting people trip over their own greed." Tomorrow, Diane would learn exactly what that meant. As I prepared the documents for the hearing, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about honoring my father's final wishes and standing up to the woman who had tried to come between us. The morning of the hearing arrived with a tension-filled atmosphere at the courthouse. Diane sat across the aisle with her lawyer, wearing an expensive black dress and a confident smirk. She'd even brought her adult children, probably hoping to paint herself as the grieving widow surrounded by loving family. I noticed how they whispered and glanced in my direction, clearly expecting an easy victory. "Don't let them rattle you," Richard whispered as we waited for the judge. "Everything's in order. Just let the evidence speak for itself." When Diane's lawyer presented their case, it was exactly what we'd expected. He painted me as a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of a dying man, and Diane as the devoted wife who'd given up everything to care for my father. He even had the audacity to suggest that my father's mental state had been compromised by his illness and medication. "Your Honor," he declared dramatically, "Mrs. Palmer simply wants what her husband would have wanted, for her to maintain the lifestyle they shared and to protect the family home they built together." I felt my blood boil at the word "together." Diane had spent exactly 5 years with my father, most of which she'd spent spending his money and isolating him from his friends and family. She'd contributed nothing to the business or home he'd spent 30 years building. Richard remained calm as he stood to present our evidence. "Your Honor, I have here not only the legal documentation of Mr. Palmer's wishes, but video evidence of him explicitly stating his decisions and the reasoning behind them." The courtroom fell silent as my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired from his illness, but his eyes were clear and determined as he spoke. "I am making these changes to my will of sound mind and body. My daughter Sophie is the rightful heir to my estate. My current wife Diane has been provided for adequately through her prenuptial agreement, but she will not inherit my business or family home. These belong to my daughter." I watched as Diane's smirk faltered, her face growing paler with each passing minute. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat as more evidence was presented: the documented conversations, the medical evaluations, the meticulous paper trail my father had created. The judge sat forward, studying the documentation carefully. The medical reports confirming my father's mental clarity were particularly damaging to Diane's case. Then came the most devastating evidence: surveillance footage from my father's home office showing Diane searching through his files late at night, along with bank statements revealing suspicious transfers she'd attempted to make in the weeks before his death. Furthermore, Your Honor, Richard continued, we have evidence that Mrs. Palmer attempted to transfer significant sums from Mr. Palmer's business accounts to her personal accounts without authorization, just days before his passing. Diane's face turned from pale to crimson. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something urgently in her ear, but she brushed him off, standing up abruptly. He promised me everything, she burst out, losing her composure completely. Sophie manipulated him against me. I deserve that house. I was his wife. Mrs. Palmer, please be seated, the judge ordered sternly. Your outburst isn't helping your case. I remained silent, watching as Diane's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her children looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. The whispers among the observers grew louder as Diane continued to protest. Richard then presented the final piece of evidence, a video recorded just 2 weeks before my father's death, where he explicitly detailed his concerns about Diane's behavior and his reasons for the estate planning decisions. The courtroom fell silent as they watched my father, weak but clear-minded, describing how Diane had tried to isolate him and control his assets. Order in the court, the judge demanded, banging his gavel. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I'm prepared to make my ruling. I held my breath, though I already knew we had won. The extensive preparation my father had done left no room for doubt. Still, hearing the judge officially declare that all of my father's final wishes would be upheld felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Furthermore, the judge added, looking directly at Diane, any attempts to contest this ruling will result in a thorough investigation into the suspicious financial activities brought to light today. Do I make myself clear? The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as Diane slumped in her chair, finally silent. Her lawyer quickly gathered his papers, already knowing they'd lost completely. But what happened next was even more satisfying than the verdict itself. The court also orders a full audit of all financial transactions made by Mrs. Palmer during her marriage to the deceased, the judge continued. Given the evidence of attempted unauthorized transfers, this matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities for investigation. Diane's face drained of all color. Her children, who had been so smugly confident earlier, were now quickly leaving the courtroom, not even waiting for their mother. The carefully crafted image of the grieving widow had shattered completely, revealing the truth my father had known all along. As we left the courthouse, Richard handed me a sealed envelope. Your father asked me to give you this after the hearing, he said quietly. Inside was a letter my father had written, along with photos of us from when I was young, standing proud in front of our first real estate project together. My dearest Sophie, the letter began, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. I knew Diane would show her true colors eventually. While I regret bringing her into our lives, I never doubted your strength or intelligence. The business is yours now. Everything we built together. You were always my true partner in this journey. I felt tears welling up as I read his words, but they weren't tears of sadness. My father had given me one final gift, not just the inheritance, but the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Through careful planning and foresight, he'd ensured that the truth would prevail. That evening, as I sat in my father's study, now my study, I noticed Diane's designer bag still sitting in the corner. She would need to collect her personal belongings soon, but that would be her final visit to the house that had never truly been hers. 2 weeks after the hearing, I began the process of going through my father's belongings. Each room held memories, but his study affected me the most. Sitting at his desk, I found myself surrounded by 30 years of business records, family photos, and personal mementos. It was here that he'd taught me about real estate, showing me property assessments and explaining market trends when I was barely old enough to understand. Diane had scheduled a time to collect her things, supervised by our lawyers. As I prepared for her final visit, I discovered something interesting, a hidden compartment in my father's desk containing a journal. He'd documented everything, Diane's manipulation attempts, her secret phone calls, her late-night snooping through his files. He'd known exactly who she was, but had played along while protecting what mattered most. The police investigation into Diane's financial activities revealed even more than we'd expected. She'd attempted to transfer nearly $300,000 from my father's accounts in his final weeks. The detective assigned to the case found similar patterns in her past relationships. She had a history of targeting wealthy, older men, though none had been as prepared as my father. I threw myself into running the business, expanding on the foundation my father had built. The employees welcomed me warmly. Many had known me since childhood and had witnessed my father grooming me for leadership. They shared stories about how he'd proudly shown them photos of my college graduation, my first real estate deal, my successes. One evening, while reviewing some old contracts, I received an unexpected call from Thomas, one of Diane's children. "Sophie," he said hesitantly, I wanted to apologize. We knew what our mother was doing, but we didn't stop her. Your father was a good man who deserved better." His words surprised me, but they also brought a sense of validation. Even Diane's own children had seen through her act. Thomas explained that she'd pulled similar schemes before, targeting wealthy older men. My father had been different, though. He'd seen it coming and had outmaneuvered her completely. The business thrived under my leadership, and I found myself adding my own touches to my father's legacy. I established a scholarship program for aspiring real estate professionals, naming it after him. The first recipient was a young woman whose single father had sacrificed everything to support her education. It felt like coming full circle. The day Diane came to collect her belongings was tense. She arrived with 2 movers and her lawyer, looking considerably less polished than during the hearing. As she walked through the house, I noticed how she lingered in front of certain items, particularly the expensive decorations she'd convinced my father to buy. "You can take what you personally purchased," Richard reminded her firmly. "Everything else stays." He had a detailed inventory of what belonged to the estate. Diane's face tightened as she realized how little she could actually claim. During this final visit, I maintained my distance, working in my father's study while they packed. Through the open door, I could hear her muttering about family heirlooms, though none of them were actually hers. Richard stopped her several times from trying to take items that belonged to my mother, or had been in our family for generations. The most satisfying moment came when she tried to claim an antique grandfather clock, insisting my father had promised it to her. Richard simply pulled out a photograph from 30 years ago, showing the clock in our living room when I was a child, long before Diane entered our lives. "Mrs. Palmer," he said firmly, "please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The clock stayed, along with numerous other items she tried to claim. As she prepared to leave, Diane paused in the foyer. For a moment, I thought she might try to apologize or make amends. Instead, she spoke bitterly. "You think you've won, but you'll end up alone just like your father did." I stepped out of the study, facing her directly. "My father was never alone," I replied calmly. "He had me, his true family, by his side until the end. That's something you never understood and never will." She left without another word, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a profound sense of closure. The house seemed lighter somehow, as if her departure had lifted a heavy shadow. I walked through each room, touching the familiar surfaces, feeling truly at home for the first time since my father's passing. 1 year later, I sat in my father's, now my, office, reviewing our latest property acquisition. The business had grown significantly under my leadership, expanding into new markets while maintaining the integrity my father had instilled. His photo sat on my desk, a reminder of everything he'd taught me. The investigation into Diane's financial activities had concluded, revealing a pattern of fraud that stretched back years before she met my father. She faced legal consequences for her attempts to steal from his accounts during his final days. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state, her carefully crafted image of the grieving widow completely shattered. The house felt like home again. I'd preserved the elements that held family memories while updating other areas to reflect my own style. My mother's paintings once again hung in the living room, and the grandfather clock continued to mark time in the foyer, its chimes a familiar comfort. Most importantly, I'd honored my father's legacy in the way he would have wanted, not just by preserving what he built, but by building upon it. The scholarship program we'd established had already helped 3 promising students pursue their dreams in real estate development. Sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms. For me, it came through the respect and love I saw in our employees' eyes whenever they mentioned my father. They would share stories of his kindness, his business integrity, and how proud he was of me. These moments helped me understand that his legacy wasn't just in the properties or bank accounts, it was in the lives he touched and the values he instilled. Last week, I found an old photo album in his study that I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a letter dated just days before his death. Sophie, you were always stronger than you knew. Remember that success isn't just about building wealth. It's about maintaining your integrity while doing so. You've made me proud in ways I never could have imagined. The real victory wasn't just keeping what was rightfully mine. It was honoring my father's legacy by living up to the values he taught me. The business continues to thrive, but more importantly, it does so with the same principles of honesty and integrity that my father always championed. Diane's attempts to take what wasn't hers ultimately revealed the strength I inherited from my father. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about winning in court. It's about proving that goodness and truth eventually prevail.